Hello, and welcome to another edition of Exclusive Interview, coming to you from the studios of 84 TV Radio, Abuja, Nigeria. My name is Stanley Bentu. Now, aside from the three arms of government, that is the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, the media is the other institution that was mentioned with a clear role in Nigeria's constitution. That role? To be the conscience of society, to speak truth to power. But doing that can sometimes prove quite difficult. So what are the challenges that media people face? Let's have a look at this report.
On a superficial level, the media enjoys considerable freedom in Nigeria. There is a large number of daily newspapers, weekly magazines, and other publications and several private radio and television stations. Much of the media regularly carries a range of opinions, including strong criticism of government policies and debates on different issues. However, in reality, genuinely independent journalism is not as common in Nigeria as it may seem, and there is an unspoken threshold beyond which criticism is not easily tolerated. The media, like so many other sectors, is tainted by corruption, with many, though not all journalists, expecting to receive payment before agreeing to report or not to report an event. As in many other countries, deals are struck with individual politicians on whether, when, or how to report particular events. These personalized relations between politicians and individual journalists or editors allow the government a level of control over how the media represents events. However, not all journalists accept these compromises, and many continue to defy attempts at censorship. Media Rights Agenda (MRA), a Lagos-based non-governmental organization which promotes press freedom and freedom of expression, has recorded numerous cases of reported abuses against journalists and other violations of freedom of expression, including cases of physical assault by the police, as well as other forms of harassment, intimidation, and obstruction, such as destruction or confiscation of journalists' cameras. On the show today, Exclusive Interview speaks to the chairman of the Nigerian Union of Journalists in the FCT, Emmanuel Ogbechi, who offers an insight to how and why journalists can be better protected.
Well, it's now my distinct pleasure to welcome to the studio the chairman of the Abuja Council, or the FCT Council of the Nigeria Union of Journalists. That's Emmanuel Ogbechi.
Thank you, Stanley.
It's a pleasure to see you once
Yes,
again.
after a long while.
Quite a while.
Yes.
How the struggle that journalists go through, especially in recent times, has been a source for concern. But I want us to start from why the discipline of journalism is so important that it's been mentioned in the Nigerian Constitution.
Stanley, that's a great starting point. Media generally is the fulcrum of democracy. Because without journalists, without media workers, society will revert to a state of nature, because there won't be any sort of restraint on public office holders, on economic warlords, on society in general. So the media becomes a barometer to measure, to gauge the feelings, the progress, the growth, the temperament of those in power and those in society. Because every day people are glued to their TV sets, to their radio sets, they are listening on whatever appliances these days. They want to read the newspaper to clearly understand what direction society is going, what are the fault lines, and they bring this to bear. So it is so essential and critical that leaders, no matter how highly placed they are, wherever they are in this world, are so concerned about how the media operates that they want to have near absolute control, if not absolute control, over the media. That tells you the weight and power the media carries. So it is very, very important in our day-to-day activity.
Yet the attitudes of some of our leaders in Nigeria, there's very little tolerance, especially for criticism of certain government policies, and so we see varying results of negative reactions towards the media. So, what is responsible for this?
Well, I will tie this to the poverty that pervades the media space. And let me explain. Because government understands that if you have a viable, viral, and strong media, the people will be empowered. So what did government do? Alongside the economic elite, they decided that the media should be weakened. And to do that, they ignored the poverty that pervades the media space. And there is no law to guarantee that the media should be well funded, that there should be a minimum requirement for you to set up a media house. You understand? In places like South Africa, there are safeguards. People say there are labor laws, but the labor laws are general, not specific. We require very specific laws to govern the media space. And because they understand how the media operates and the inherent powers that the media carries, what they simply did was, okay, let us just weaken journalists and media workers, materially. And when we do that, the issue of criticism becomes here and there, far in between. And even at that, governments generally are intolerant of criticism because they believe that it exposes them to ridicule. It exposes them to citizens holding them accountable.
Very often there is that comment, this publication was done to embarrass
government. And these days...
But is there a crime in our laws that says governments should not be embarrassed?
No, these days, Stanley, it's just about
is there
fake news.
A law that says that?
There is no law, absolutely. Because the Constitution in Chapter 22 has given us as journalists, the media, the power to hold government and its officials accountable to the people.
So this is a carryover from the military administrations. This
Absolutely.
Belief that governments should not be embarrassed.
Well, if we look at countries we say advanced like the US, and we take the incumbent President Donald Trump, he's adverse to criticism. So I do not absolutely want to say it's about a hangover of military rule. In some other climes, some other leaders that lay pretensions to democratic norms still do not want to be criticized. They do not want their policies to be closely interrogated. You understand? But by and large in Nigeria, I think it has to do with our military, our years of military rule.
And journalists have suffered, quite a bit of physical assault and all kinds of physical abuse as a result of covering one story or the other. So what are some of the worst that you've witnessed during your time as president, and how have you been able to tackle that?
As chairman.
As chairman?
Yes. Okay, now one classic example that just came up yesterday, the case came up at the Court of Appeal. Desmond Utuwe used to work with the news. 5 years ago, he was assaulted here in Abuja by the police when he went to a bank and saw what was happening outside the banking premises and decided to take some photographs. He was brutalized and detained. He went to court, got judgment of 100 million. 5 years after, the police and the bank refused to pay an appeal. The case just came up. I have seen where at the PDP party secretariat, where a colleague of ours was thoroughly beaten by the police. What we have tried to do within this period is to build synergy with security agencies for them to understand that as journalists, we are partners in progress, that we have the constitutional role to interrogate issues and to hold government officials accountable. There are instances we have outrightly demanded for apologies from those that have been perpetrators of this assault, harassment, and sometimes detention. We want to also test. There is a particular case now. We want to test what the law says. We have instructed our lawyers to go to court. A colleague was badly beaten not too long ago at another party secretariat here in Abuja. So we keep interfacing with security agencies because by and large they are the ones responsible for some of these assaults that journalists face. But we also know that non-state actors are also responsible for some threats to journalists. So what we tell our colleagues is your safety is paramount. You must be very careful. You must be mindful of where you go. You must also try as much as possible to ensure that you're not being tailed by...
Can you give us an example of a non-state actor carrying out violence against a journalist? What typically would lead to this?
Well, if you remember, not too long ago, this day was bombed in Abuja by Boko Haram in the and we've also had threats to media houses over certain stories. Headsmen have also written to one or two media houses that they have not been favorably reported on. So, and they should be careful. That's threat in itself. And you become afraid that because I work for a certain media organization, I could easily become target if I'm identified by these elements. But by and large, most of these have been reported to the security agencies, and they are very much aware of these threats.
Okay. Well, very interesting conversation we are having so far, but don't go away, because when we come back, we'll find out how journalists are coping with non-payment of salaries, as well as other challenges within the industry. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I've been spending some time with Emmanuel Ogbeche, who's the chairman of the Nigeria Union of Journalists in the FCT. Challenges that journalists are facing, especially keeping themselves safe. Before we went to break, you were telling me about, state actors, non-state actors that have been having conflicts and clashes with journalists. So how can a journalist practice his profession safely? What are the things that he should consider to stay away from all this? I understand that it may not be impossible. Sooner or later you will run into some kind of clash, but you would like to avoid it as much as possible, wouldn't you?
Yes, it's not foolproof staying safe, but we preach professionalism, balance, and integrity. There is no weapon that is greater, or that there is no weapon against threat other than being professional in what you do. That is why we try as much as possible as a union to tell our members and colleagues that when there are issues that requires your reporting, especially if there are political, religious, cultural, ethnic in nature, those areas in particular, you must interrogate the facts carefully. You must listen to all the parties involved. You cannot be reporting on herders farmers clash and you ignore the fact that you need to speak to both parties and clearly represent both sides. Because if you go to an agrarian community and you decide to speak only to farmers, they have alleged destruction to their communities by herders and all of that, you should be able to find a means to speak to herders, to actually determine if there were, the culprits in all of these allegations. You also need to try to speak to security agencies, because most times in our rush to want to break the news, we forget the basic ethics that balance and objectivity are key ingredients in every report. I know sometimes it's very difficult to find the other party, but you must go the extra mile rather than breaking the news that could inflame passions and set one against the other. Then you must also try as much as possible to document. If I call you on phone, I should tell you I'm putting you on record. You understand? The idea that I call you and I do not tell you, listen, this is for the record, and I go ahead to publish what ordinarily should have been left out. It calls for litigation. It calls for some persons undertaking untoward action towards the individual in question. So we encourage colleagues to be very mindful of what they do, to ensure that their records are straight. They speak to all sides, and they should take the issue of cyber security very seriously. You cannot allow yourself vulnerable in cyberspace, especially as a journalist, especially in this age where governments are very wary of what journalists and media workers are doing. There are certain safeguards you need to undertake in the course of your duties as a journalist.
So if a journalist gets assaulted,
yes,
say by an officer of the law, what should he do, and how does the council get involved in this?
Yeah, the fourth thing we encourage our members to do is do not fight back, because he's an officer of the law. Though he's behaving badly, you should be able to demonstrate that you're a better individual than whoever is assaulting you. Report to the council. Do a petition. Generally, what we do is we ask you to do a petition, document what transpired and those that were there. If there are video clips or audio clips, you should be able to give it to us through a hard drive or flash drive. Then, as a council, we will write a cover note attached to that petition. Let us assume it is a police officer that is involved, and we take it to the state command and ensure that we follow through with this. If it requires us seeking for legal advice or representation in this instance, the council undertakes that. But first and foremost, you should gather your facts and do not delay in reporting this. If, for instance, I am assaulted now by 11 a.m. in the morning, there is no reason why before 12 I shouldn't have been able to, except it is that bad that I'm hospitalized. Then at least there should be colleagues or people that saw what happened to report to us, then we could go there. Immediately it happened and you can find your way to the council or put a call through to any of our officials, somebody will definitely respond to that situation.
You mentioned earlier that you've had interactions with the security operatives, the police force and others.
DSS
and of course, by and large, you have policemen who would behave within the bracket of the law. Unfortunately, there are those who would go beyond and behave rather badly.
Certainly.
And cast a bad light on the institutions. So how have you been able to influence the attitudes of these organizations to bring them to a point where they say, no, we will not tolerate our operatives behaving in such a manner?
Well, let me commend the FCT Commissioner of Police. He has been very exemplary in this regard, as well as the Director of State Services here in the FCT. Let me use the period of the lockdown as an instance. You know, most of us had passes because we needed to monitor compliance and also continue with the business of reporting. Despite the fact that we had passes, most of us, we encountered some police officers in particular that felt journalists should not be on the road. And the immediate past spokesperson of the police here in FCT, Manza Ajugore, DSP, was very helpful because he had a firm instruction from the Commissioner of Police. And a few times that we had roadblocks or harassment from law enforcement agencies, just one call to our situation room was all that was needed. And after the first lockdown, the second lockdown, we didn't have any instance where colleagues were harassed or intimidated by security agencies. Because during the first lockdown, we had a few, and when we made our position known and made reports to the appropriate authorities, especially the Commissioner of Police here in the FCT, those issues were addressed. And thus far, it has always been so. If you take a statistics of such incidents here in the FCT, it is very minimal. Yes, there are instances where some overzealous security personnel attached to a VIP, could misbehave, but it doesn't get to the point where we could say they were assaulted.
So let's talk about and turn the flashlight or the spotlight on the media itself. There's corruption even in the Nigerian media. It's a product of Nigerian society after all. But you mentioned something that got me thinking. This is that when you have journalists who are not paid often, is this what leads to certain journalists expecting envelopes of money to be paid to them for covering an event or that? And then how much does that create some room for government to influence the media in certain ways?
Stanley, the issue of corruption in the media isn't just about the reporter on the field. Most often than not, people tend to obscure the fact that media owners themselves are corrupt. Yes, we never get to talk about that.
And a lot of them have political agenda.
Yes, an economic interest to protect as well. So I agree completely that there is corruption in the media. And it has to do with the very poor working conditions we have. For us as a union, we've advocated for a media salary scale. And the law should also give a minimum for anybody that wants to set up a media house. You and I know of a story of a certain publisher from Nigeria that went to South Africa and felt he could get away with what he was doing in Nigeria. But under a year, he ran back because they said, no, in this country there are laws, and those laws are strictly enforced in terms of remuneration, wages and allowances for those that work for you. What we require in this country to strengthen the media and to put an end to the corruption is that there must be a law that sets the basic minimum. That is all we're asking for. When the media is corrupt, it becomes weak, it becomes pliant, and it does not help in growth and development. Because if I have already been compromised, I will turn a blind eye to the fact that there ought to be a primary health care center just down my street. There should be a borehole in a school. You get all of this.
Mm-hmm. So how would the government come in? Because part of the problem is that even when you set a scale, the reporter does not even see the salaries. Some media owners simply don't pay.
Yes, so media, Any media organization that cannot pay should be liquidated, and its assets sold, and whatever it is should be, after being sold, should be given to those that had worked for it. We just yesterday, and we were discussing on this issue, and it also borders on your personal integrity. Because if you're consistent and persistent and diligent in what you're doing, the rewards will eventually come. But the idea, as a journalist, you shouldn't be, you're part of society, but you shouldn't be part of society. What do I mean? You should stand above board from every other profession because you're the conscience of society. You're held to a higher ethical standard than every other person. That is why you find most Nigerians say, let me use pidgin. Now then they curse them, the journalists, they know they report to it, they take money. You know, I get that a lot often. And that tells you the standard in which society holds you. So you should bring your personal integrity to bear, that I can turn away from this, that in due course I will bear the fruit of my being upright and working for the good of society. I know it's very difficult. We have to pay our bills, but there are also opportunities that you can explore as a journalist to survive. If you undertake to do, if for instance you're covering energy and you're consistent in what you're doing in that sector, you can get grants. And I encourage colleagues to always come together, pull resources together to pursue a single story. A story that is geared towards changing policy or exposing rot in the system. That is the only way you can get recognized. Because if we continue in this manner of he said, I said, they said, you know, we
most likely will not get very far.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come here and speak to us. It's been very enlightening indeed.
Thank you very much, Stanley. I hope this conversation can continue some other time.
Certainly, we'll look into that. We will be right back. A very enlightening conversation there with the chairman of the FCT Council of the NUJ, Emmanuel Ogbeche, giving advice on how we can maneuver the checkered terrain that is Nigerian journalism. It's important to remember to bring our integrity and be professional at every instance. And that's it for Exclusive Interview today. Until we come your way again next time, thank you for stopping by.